So this is a tutorial on the gross anatomy of the muscle system, and we're going to be focusing on muscles to know from the neck area. Generally, these muscles are going to help us extend the head, flex the head forward, or rotate. And they can even help you bend. Some of them will help you bend your head to the right or the left. So the first muscle we're going to look at is the sternocleidomastoid muscle. It gets its name based on the bones that it is attached to. The origin is going to be the sternum and the clavicle, and the insertion is going to be behind the ear. Over here in the isolated image of the muscle, there's the mastoid process, and there's your insertion, and your origin is down over here, the sternum and the clavicle. If both muscles contract, your head would flex, so that would be the action. If only one contracts, then your, depending on the side that contracts, your head would rotate. In the image here, you can see that upon contraction, the muscle would pull down and inward, both downward and inward on the mastoid process. So if only like in this image, that's the right sternocleidomastoid, if it were to contract, it would rotate the head in the opposite direction. So if the right sternocleidomastoid contracts, then your head would rotate to the left, or it can help rotate the head to the left. Now if both contract, both would be pulling downward, and that would help pull your head forward in a flexion. Next muscle to know is the Splenius capitis, and the Splenius capitis is on the back of the neck, and this particular muscle, the origin is going to be cervical vertebrae and thoracic vertebrae. So the origin is back over here, and the insertion is going to be the occipital bone, right back up here, and this is the right Splenius capitis. And notice the direction of the fibers or the fascicles somewhat at an angle. And again, this muscle is deep. It's going to be deeper to your traps or your trapezius muscle here. So if we remove that, you see this image on the right over here, and that would be your Splenius capitis. And so if both were to contract, then this is going to pull your head backward, and that would help you extend back the head. If only one contracts, then you're going to rotate the head, but the rotation is going to be in the same direction as the muscle. So if this is the right Splenius capitis, then it can help rotate your head in the right direction. Again, if both contract, then your head would be pulled backwards. And so the bottom image on the left is we do have a model very similar to this one. And the right side shows the superficial muscle, the trapezius muscle. And if we remove it, then you can see the Splenius capitis right here, and note the direction of those fibers, the fascicles in there. And because there's other muscles that are deeper, and focusing on the direction of the fascicles within the muscle, you'll be able to, it'll help you identify. When you see them moving at an angle, that's your Splenius capitis muscle. The next muscle is also called capitis, and capitis refer to the head area, or action on the head. And this one is the Semispinalis capitis. And this muscle is deeper to the previous one. So this one is deeper to the Splenius capitis. In this image, the Splenius capitis is represented there on the left side. And if we remove that, we're going to get a clearer look at the Splenius capitis. There's also a Splenius cervicis, which is referring to the neck region. But this one is the capitis because its insertion is on the head at the occipital bone. And it continues downward, and the insertion, the origin would be the cervical vertebrae and thoracic vertebrae. And so the image on the where we isolate the muscle is going to show the insertion there on the occipital bone, and the muscle runs downward along the side, and it's going to originate on these processes of the cervical and the thoracic vertebrae. So this would be your origin here. So when this muscle contracts, it's basically going to be pulling downward. And again, If only one side contracts, then it can help rotate the head. If both contract, both semispinalis, capitis left and right muscles contract, that would help extend the head. So in this image here, if only the left were to contract, that would also help pull the head in the left direction, and so you can get a left rotation. If both contract, then you get an extension where the head is pulled backwards. The next muscle is the longissimus, and the longissimus actually runs all along the back. You can see the image where we isolate it here on the bottom over here, and so there's different sections of there. There's the capitis because of the insertion being on the head, and then you have the cervicis, and then the thoracis over here. So because we're in the neck region, we're going to focus on the capitis and the cervicis, and the origin is going to be the vertebrae, thoracic vertebrae, T1 through T5 for the capitis specifically, and the cervicus as well. And the insertion is going to be the temporal bone, and this is true for the capitis. So we're just looking at the longissimus capitis, and this muscle is pretty deep. So if we remove the muscles we've been talking about so far, like the Splenius capitis here and the Semispinalis capitis that's right here, and we remove those muscles, then we would be able to see the longissimus cervicus. And so the longissimus cervicus is right here. It's a thin strap looking like muscle. There it is coming down towards the thoracic vertebrae, but it comes up here and it inserts on the temporal bone, specifically the mastoid process. So when we look at it in isolation, and I have several images showing this. You see it in isolation here. I'm tracing it out, the longissimus capitis, and then over here you can see it in isolation. Here's the insertion on the temporal bone, and there's this muscle coming out towards the vertebrae. And then here it is again in a lateral view. There is your insertion right there, and then the muscle running down to go attached to the vertebrae, the thoracic region. And this muscle, if it contracts together with the right and the left, it can help extend the head. And if it contracts individually, then it can help rotate the head. And so that would cause, in this case, if the right longissimus capitis contracts, then that would create a rightward rotation if the right longissimus capitis rotates. Now, if both contract, that can also help with extension of the head, where you pull your head backward. Okay. Then we have two muscles in the neck are part of the infrahyoid group. The first one is lateral to the second one, but they're both here in the neck region. So if we remove that thin sheet of muscle that covers all these muscles, the platysma, which was mentioned in the last one, the first muscle we're going to look at is the omohyoid, which is lateral to the other muscles. So we're talking about this muscle here to the left, and you can see that it starts moving downward, and it gets its name partially because it inserts on the hyoid bone, and as it moves downward, it goes behind the sternocleidomastoid, and it's actually going to be directed backward and attach onto the scapula, which if the scapula is fixed, then this is the origin. So the origin would be the scapula, the superior surface, and the insertion is the hyoid bone. So we look at it from a lateral view. This would be the right omohyoid with all the other muscles removed. There's your hyoid bone, which is the insertion, the part that's acted on. And you're going to have a superior belly of the muscle, which then converts to some tendon. And then it's going to be attached to the clavicle. And then the tendon is directed backwards, where you'll have the inferior belly that moves back and attaches onto the scapula, making this your origin. So when these muscles contract, we're pulling downward, which is why the action is to depress the hyoid bone. The next muscle is the sternohyoid, and this one gets its name based on the two bones it's connected to. The hyoid is the last part, is the insertion, and the origin is going to be here. The muscle goes behind the sternocleidomastoid, but it's going to attach onto the sternum and the sternum only, And so the origin would be the sternum, specifically the manubrium, and the insertion would be the hyoid bone. And this is going to have the same action. It's going to depress the hyoid bone or pull down on it. So here's the hyoid bone in the picture on the bottom right, where we're isolating with lateral view. The insertion would be the hyoid bone, and the origin would be the sternum. So again, when that one contracts, we're going to pull downward on the hyoid bone. The isolation picture here shows both the left and the right sternohyoid muscles. So that's it for the muscles of the neck to know. And now you should practice identifying these muscles. And one way you can practice identifying and naming them is either on your body, on a model, or on an image. You're going to want to make sure you recite so that you can remember the name, and then write so you can spell correctly. If you misspell, practice spelling the names. Make sure you spell the name correctly. Say and spell it correctly. You also need to be able to say the origin and the insertion. And a lot of times you can identify those origin insertions by looking at the muscle on models. And then the action. And it needs to be a short phrase. You can't just say depresses or extends. You have to say what part is being depressed or extended. So if we're going to say rotates, well, rotates what? So the sternocleidomastoid rotates the head, right? So that would be a full phrase saying what the action is. And for many of these muscles, not all of them, you can actually try to simulate the action, so you can learn kinesthetically by moving your body based on the action of that muscle. Occasionally you may have some models, we don't have many that are movable, so you might work a model, and for example you could do the articulated skeleton and just move the skeleton slightly to simulate that action. So that's it for this tutorial on muscles to know from the neck region.